The dust-laden wind whipped across Josephine Harrington's face as she watched the stagecoach rumble away, taking with it her last hope of reaching Scottsbluff before nightfall. The year was 1876, and the Nebraska Territory was no place for a woman alone as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. She had begged the driver to wait just 5 minutes more while she retrieved her dropped handkerchief from the station. But business waited for no one in these parts, especially not a 22-year-old woman with nothing but a carpetbag and dreams of a new beginning. Josephine's honey blonde hair, partially escaped from its pins after the long journey, fluttered around her face as she squinted at the disappearing cloud of dust. Her green traveling dress, once crisp and proper when she'd left St. Louis 3 weeks prior, now hung limply on her frame, stained with the evidence of hard travel. She fought back tears of frustration. The station at the crossroads was nothing more than a rickety building, now locked up tight, the station master having departed with the stagecoach for the overnight journey to the next stop. "Not exactly how I planned to start my new life," she muttered, setting her carpetbag down beside her trunk, which the stagecoach attendants had unceremoniously dropped before speeding away. Josephine glanced at the sun, calculating she had perhaps 2 hours of daylight left. Scottsbluff was still 15 miles northeast, an impossible distance to walk, especially with her belongings. The sound of hoofbeats made her turn, hope flaring in her chest. A rider approached from the west, his silhouette backlit by the setting sun. As he drew closer, Josephine could make out a tall man atop a chestnut stallion, his broad shoulders and the unmistakable silhouette of a cowboy hat against the golden sky. She smoothed her skirts instinctively, wondering if she looked as disheveled as she felt. The rider slowed his horse as he approached, and Josephine could see him clearly now, perhaps 30 years old, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years under the open sky. His eyes, a striking blue that reminded her of a summer sky, assessed her situation in seconds. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat respectfully, "looks like you've been left behind." Josephine straightened her spine, attempting to maintain what dignity she had left. "The stagecoach departed while I was retrieving something I'd dropped. I'm trying to reach Scottsbluff." The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, his movements suggesting a lifetime in the saddle. "Zachary Blackburn," he introduced himself with another tip of his hat. "Ranch foreman at the Lazy R just outside of Scottsbluff." "Josephine Harrington," she replied, extending her gloved hand. "I'm to be the new schoolteacher." A smile crept across his face, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "The town's been waiting on you, Miss Harrington. Mayor's been talking about nothing else for weeks. And now I'm stranded," she said, gesturing helplessly to her trunk. Zachary looked from her to her belongings, then to the vast empty landscape around them. His decision took only moments. "I'll take you home, Miss Harrington. To Scottsbluff." Josephine couldn't keep the hope from her voice. "Yes, madam. Can't leave you out here for the wolves and coyotes." He moved toward her trunk. "My horse can carry you and your carpetbag. I'll fashion something to drag your trunk behind us." "Mr. Blackburn, I couldn't possibly impose." "Zach," he interrupted. "Everyone calls me Zach, and it's no imposition. Town needs its schoolteacher." Within 15 minutes, Zachary had created a makeshift travois using rope from his saddlebag and branches from a nearby cottonwood. He secured Josephine's trunk to it, then helped her mount his horse, her carpetbag tied securely to the saddle. "You comfortable up there, Miss Harrington?" he asked, looking up at her. "Please call me Josephine," she said, feeling the warmth of his hands lingering where he'd helped her up. "And yes, I'm fine, thank you." Zachary nodded and took the reins, beginning to lead the horse on foot. "It'll be slow going, but we should make it to town before full dark." As they set off, Josephine found herself studying the back of her rescuer. Broad shoulders tapered to a narrow waist, his stride long and confident across the uneven ground. He wore simple clothing, a faded blue shirt, worn denim trousers, and boots that had clearly seen many miles. His dark brown hair curled slightly where it met his collar, and though he was dusty from the trail, there was something undeniably appealing about him. "Have you lived in Scottsbluff long?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Born and raised," he replied without turning. "Left for a spell during the war, but came back in '66. Nothing pulls at me like Nebraska." "The war?" Josephine hesitated. "You fought for the Union." "I did. Cavalry." His voice was matter-of-fact. "Lost my pa in the fighting at Shiloh. He'd gone east to find my uncle who joined up with the 1st Nebraska." "I'm sorry," Josephine said softly. "My father died at Gettysburg." Zachary glanced back at her, their eyes meeting briefly. "Seems we have that in common, then." As they continued, Josephine shared that she had come from St. Louis, where she'd been raised by her mother after her father's death. She had trained as a teacher, and when the opportunity arose to take a position in the growing town of Scottsbluff, she had seized it, eager for adventure and a fresh start. "My mother passed last winter," she explained. "There was nothing keeping me in St. Louis anymore." "It takes courage to start over somewhere new," Zachary said, his voice carrying a note of respect. "Or desperation," Josephine replied with a small laugh. "Sometimes they're not so different." The landscape around them was beautiful in its vastness, rolling hills covered in prairie grass that turned golden in the fading light, punctuated occasionally by stands of cottonwood trees along distant creek beds. The air smelled of sage and dust and coming night. "There," Zachary said after they had traveled for over an hour. He pointed to the horizon where the faint outline of buildings could be seen. "Scottsbluff. Not much to look at compared to St. Louis, but it's home." Josephine felt a flutter of nervousness. This would be her home too now. "It looks perfect," she said, meaning it. After weeks of travel, the sight of civilization, even a small frontier town, was welcome indeed. The sun was setting in earnest as they approached the outskirts of town. Scottsbluff consisted of one main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and various other businesses. At the far end stood a white clapboard church with a modest steeple. People were still about, finishing their day's business before night fell completely. Their arrival drew attention. A man sweeping the boardwalk outside the general store paused, leaning on his broom. A woman carrying a basket stopped to stare. Zachary led the horse directly to a 2-story building with mayor's office painted on the front window. "Wait here," he told Josephine, tying his horse to the hitching post. "Mayor Thornton will want to know you've arrived." Josephine nodded, suddenly conscious of her appearance. After days on the stagecoach and now hours on horseback, she must look a fright. She tried to smooth her hair and brush dust from her skirts, but it was largely a futile effort. Zachary returned moments later with a portly man in a vest and spectacles. "Miss Harrington, welcome to Scottsbluff." The man boomed, his face wreathed in smiles. "I'm Mayor Edward Thornton. We'd begun to worry when the stagecoach arrived without you." "It's my fault entirely, Mayor," Josephine said, accepting Zachary's help to dismount. Her legs felt stiff and unsteady. "I'm afraid I wasn't quick enough for the stagecoach schedule. Mr. Blackburn was kind enough to bring me into town." "That's Zach for you," the mayor said, clapping the cowboy on the shoulder. "Always in the right place at the right time." A small crowd had gathered by now, curious about the new arrival. Mayor Thornton raised his voice slightly. "Folks, this here is Miss Josephine Harrington, our new schoolteacher. School starts next Monday, parents, so have your children ready." There were murmurs of greeting and nods of welcome. Josephine smiled, feeling overwhelmed but pleased by the reception. "Now Miss Harrington must be exhausted," the mayor continued. "Mrs. Peterson has prepared the teacherage for you. It's just behind the schoolhouse." "Zach, Would you mind escorting Miss Harrington there while I arrange for her trunk to be delivered?" "Of course," Zachary agreed, retrieving Josephine's carpetbag from his saddle. The teacherage, as Mayor Thornton called it, turned out to be a small but tidy cottage a short distance behind the schoolhouse at the eastern edge of town. By the time they reached it, full dark had fallen and lamps had been lit in windows throughout Scottsbluff. A plump, gray-haired woman waited on the porch, a lantern in her hand. "Miss Harrington, there you are. We were so worried when you weren't on the stage," she hustled down the steps. "I'm Martha Peterson, head of the school board. I've got supper waiting for you inside and the kettle's hot for a bath if you want one." "That sounds heavenly, Mrs. Peterson. Thank you." Josephine could have wept with gratitude at the thought of hot food and a bath. Mrs. Peterson ushered them inside, where a cozy parlor opened to a small dining area and kitchen. A door off the parlor presumably led to a bedroom. Everything was simple but clean, with cheerful curtains at the windows and a vase of wildflowers on the table. "Mr. Blackburn, thank you again for your assistance," Josephine said, turning to her rescuer. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Zachary shifted the carpetbag in his hands. "Just glad I was passing by. Where would you like this, madam?" "Oh, just there by the door is fine." He set it down carefully. "Well, I should be getting back to the ranch. The men will be wondering where I've gone." Mrs. Peterson interjected. "Nonsense. You'll stay for supper, Zach Blackburn. I've made plenty, and it's the least we can do after you've brought our teacher safely to town." Zachary looked as though he might protest, but then nodded. "Much obliged, Mrs. Peterson." As they sat down to a meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie, Josephine felt her exhaustion begin to fade. The simple, delicious food and the warm welcome helped erase the anxiety of her mishap with the stagecoach. Throughout the meal, she found herself repeatedly glancing at Zachary. He spoke easily with Mrs. Peterson about ranch business and town matters, but seemed to grow quieter whenever Josephine addressed him directly. There was something in his eyes when he looked at her, a warmth, perhaps, or curiosity that made her heart beat a little faster. When supper was done, Mrs. Peterson announced she needed to get home to her husband. "Your trunk should arrive shortly, dear." The mayor was arranging for the Wilkins boys to bring it over with their wagon. After she left, an awkward silence fell between Josephine and Zachary. He stood by the door, hat in hand, seemingly reluctant to leave yet uncertain of his welcome. "Mr. Blackburn, Zach, I truly cannot thank you enough," Josephine said softly. "Anyone would have done the same," he replied, his eyes meeting hers. "Perhaps. But it was you who came along when I needed help the most." She stepped closer. "I hope this isn't the last time we see each other." A slow smile spread across his face. "No, madam, Scottsbluff isn't big enough for that. Besides, my sister's 2 boys will be in your classroom come Monday." The sound of a wagon outside interrupted the moment. Zachary opened the door to find 2 teenage boys unloading Josephine's trunk. "Evening, Miss Harrington," the older of the 2 said, tipping his cap. "Mayor sent us with your things." "Thank you," Josephine said, fishing in her reticule for a coin to tip them. "No need for that, madam," the younger boy said. "Ma says teachers don't pay for honest work in Scottsbluff." After the boys had gone, Zachary lingered a moment longer. "I'll check on you tomorrow if that's all right." "Make sure you're settling in." "I'd like that very much," Josephine replied, warmth spreading through her at the thought. He nodded, put on his hat, and stepped into the night. Josephine watched from the doorway as he untied his horse, mounted in one fluid motion, and rode off toward the outskirts of town. Only when he had disappeared into the darkness did she close the door, leaning against it with a sigh that was part exhaustion, part exhilaration. "What an unexpected turn of events," she murmured to herself, looking around at what would be her home for the foreseeable future. Despite the trials of the day, or perhaps because of them, Josephine felt more alive than she had in months. Scottsbluff, it seemed, might offer more than just a fresh start. The next morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the curtains Josephine had been too tired to close the night before. For a moment, she lay disoriented, the unfamiliar ceiling above her a puzzle until memory returned. She was in Scottsbluff, in her own little house behind the schoolhouse, where she would begin teaching in just 3 days. Rising, she washed at the basin on the dresser and dressed in one of her simpler dresses, a sky blue cotton with white piping. Her trunk had yielded up its contents with minimal wrinkling, thanks to her careful packing in St. Louis. She had just finished pinning up her hair when a knock sounded at the front door. Her heart skipped, wondering if it might be Zachary, but when she opened the door, she found a young woman of perhaps 20 standing there with a covered basket. "Good morning. You must be Miss Harrington." "I'm Emma Blackburn, Zach's sister. I brought you some breakfast and thought I might help you get acquainted with the town." "How kind of you," Josephine said, gesturing for Emma to enter. "Please come in." Emma was a pretty girl with the same striking blue eyes as her brother, though her hair was lighter, more honey than chestnut. She moved with a brisk efficiency, setting out fresh biscuits, ham, and preserves on the small kitchen table. "Zach mentioned he brought you into town last night. Said you'd been left behind by the stagecoach. How dreadful," Emma chattered as she worked. "Though I suppose it turned out all right in the end." "Yes, I was fortunate your brother happened along," Josephine agreed, helping to pour coffee from the pot Emma had brought. "He mentioned you have sons who will be in my class." "That's right. Samuel is 10 and Timothy is 8. They're good boys, though Timmy can be a handful." Emma's face softened with motherly pride. "My husband, Daniel, runs the smithy in town. You'll meet him soon enough, I expect." As they ate, Emma provided a thorough overview of Scottsbluff and its inhabitants, who owned which business, which families had children of school age, and most importantly, according to Emma, who could be trusted for accurate gossip and who was prone to exaggeration. "Now, Mrs. Peterson, you met her last night. She's the heart of this town, but she tends to see the best in everyone, even when they don't deserve it," Emma explained. "And Mr. Hollies at the general store knows everything that happens in Scottsbluff, but he'll charge you double if he thinks you're new enough not to know better." Josephine listened, fascinated by this glimpse into the community she was joining. "And what about your brother? Where does he fit into all this?" Emma's eyes twinkled. "Zach, he keeps to himself mostly, out at the Lazy R ranch foreman for Mr. Richardson, who owns half the county but lives back east somewhere. Zach practically runs the place." She took a sip of coffee. "He's the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties, you know. Not that he pays any attention to it. Too busy with his horses and cattle." Before Josephine could respond to this intriguing information, another knock came at the door. This time it was Mayor Thornton, come to escort her to the schoolhouse for an inspection before classes began on Monday. "Don't let me interrupt your breakfast," he said, waving away Josephine's invitation to join them. "I'll wait on the porch. Take your time, ladies." Emma helped Josephine tidy up, then hugged her impulsively. "I'm so glad you're here. We haven't had a proper teacher since old Mr. Finch left last spring. The children have been running wild." "I'll do my best to tame them," Josephine promised with a laugh. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building with rows of desks facing a larger desk at the front. A blackboard covered most of the front wall, and a pot-bellied stove sat in the corner for heat during the winter months. Large windows lined both side walls, allowing plenty of light. "We have 28 students enrolled," Mayor Thornton explained as they toured the building. "Ages 6 to 16. Most of the older ones only attend in winter when there's less work to be done at home." Josephine nodded, already planning how she would manage the different age groups and abilities. The school was well equipped by frontier standards, with a small library of books, slates for the younger children, and even a globe and wall maps. "This is wonderful," she told the mayor sincerely. I can't wait to begin. Excellent. Now, I believe Mrs. Peterson has arranged for you to meet some of the townspeople at the church social tomorrow evening. It's our monthly gathering food, music, perhaps some dancing if Reverend Hughes is in a generous mood. A church social. Josephine hadn't attended such an event since before her mother fell ill. The prospect was both exciting and slightly daunting. That sounds lovely, she said. I look forward to meeting everyone. After the mayor left, Josephine spent several hours organizing the schoolroom, examining books, and making notes on what supplies she might need. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear the approaching footsteps until a shadow fell across her desk, settling in all right. Josephine looked up to find Zachary standing in the doorway, hat in hand. The sight of him sent an unexpected thrill through her. In the clear light of day, she could see him properly for the first time. His face was lean and weathered from sun and wind, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes. His jawline was strong, dusted with a day's growth of beard, and a small scar interrupted his right eyebrow. Yes, thank you, she said, rising from her seat. Everything is perfect. Your sister stopped by this morning. She's been very kind. Emma has that way about her, he agreed, stepping into the schoolroom, always taking in strays and newcomers alike. Am I a stray, Mr. Blackburn? Josephine asked with a smile. His eyes met hers, holding them for a moment longer than was strictly proper. No, madam. I'd say you're exactly where you belong. The words sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. She busied herself organizing papers on her desk. Will you be attending the church social tomorrow evening? Hadn't planned on it, he admitted. Ranch keeps me busy. Oh, Josephine tried to hide her disappointment. Of course, I understand. Zachary studied her for a moment, though I suppose one evening away from the ranch won't hurt anything. Her smile returned. I would be glad to see a familiar face among all the new ones. Then I'll be there. He glanced around the schoolroom. Need any help getting ready for Monday? Together, they spent the afternoon preparing the schoolhouse. Zachary repaired a loose floorboard and oiled the hinges of the stubborn door while Josephine organized her curriculum and wrote out lesson plans. They worked in comfortable companionship, conversation flowing easily between them. Josephine learned that Zachary had returned from the war to find his father's small ranch struggling. When the opportunity came to work for the much larger Lazy R, he had taken it, eventually working his way up to foreman. His widowed mother had passed 5 years earlier, leaving just him and Emma, who had married the blacksmith shortly after the war. And you? He asked as they walked back to her cottage in the late afternoon sunshine. What brought you all the way to Nebraska? Josephine told him about her life in St. Louis, her father's law practice that had ended with his death at Gettysburg, her mother's declining health, and the teaching position that had been her salvation during those difficult years. When Mother died, there seemed no reason to stay, she explained. I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Scottsbluff and thought, why not? I've always wanted to see more of the country. Brave decision, he commented. Traveling alone to a place where you don't know a soul. Perhaps, she allowed. Or perhaps I simply had nothing to lose. They had reached her door and Zachary paused, seeming reluctant to leave. Will you be all right for supper? I could bring something from the hotel restaurant. Thank you, but Mrs. Peterson left enough food to feed an army. I'll be fine. Josephine hesitated, then added impulsively, though I wouldn't object to company if you're not needed back at the ranch. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. I told the boys I'd be in town until evening, if you're sure it's no trouble. No trouble at all. Please, come in. They dined on the remainder of Mrs. Peterson's stew, reheated over Josephine's small stove, with fresh bread Zachary had brought from the bakery. As the sun set, casting long shadows through the cottage windows, they sat at the small table talking of books they had read, places they had seen, and dreams they still harbored. "I never thought I'd be content to stay in one place," Zachary admitted, leaning back in his chair. "After the war, I considered heading west to California or up to the gold fields in Montana. But something about this land gets under your skin." "I can already see why," Josephine said softly. "There's a freedom here, a sense of possibility." He looked at her then, really looked at her as if seeing something new. "Yes," he agreed quietly. "Exactly that." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Finally, Zachary cleared his throat and stood. "I should get back, early start tomorrow." Josephine walked him to the door, suddenly shy. "Thank you for your help today, and for dinner." "My pleasure," he said, placing his hat on his head. "I'll see you tomorrow evening at the social. I'll look forward to it." After he left, Josephine stood at the window watching his retreating figure, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within her. She had come to Scottsbluff seeking a new beginning, a place to build a life after loss. She had not expected to find herself drawn so quickly to a man she had known less than 24 hours. "Don't be foolish," she told herself firmly. "He's simply being neighborly." Yet as she prepared for bed, she found herself wondering what dress she should wear to the church social, and whether Zachary Blackburn might ask her to dance. The following evening, Josephine stood before her small mirror, assessing her appearance with critical eyes. She had chosen her best dress, a deep emerald green with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. The color brought out the green of her eyes and complemented her fair complexion. She had pinned her hair in a style that was neither too elaborate nor too simple, with a few curls left to frame her face. "This will have to do," she murmured, though in truth she knew she looked better than she had in months. There was a glow about her that had nothing to do with cosmetics and everything to do with anticipation. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Emma Blackburn, who had offered to walk with her to the church. "Oh my," Emma exclaimed upon seeing her. "You look absolutely lovely. Every unmarried man in Scottsbluff will be falling over himself to court the new schoolteacher." Josephine blushed. "I simply wanted to make a good impression on the parents of my future students." Emma's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe this for a moment, but she kindly refrained from saying so. "Well, you'll certainly do that. Shall we go? Daniel has taken the boys ahead to help set up the tables." The church was ablaze with light as they approached, lanterns hanging from the porch and every window glowing warmly. The sounds of conversation and laughter spilled out into the early evening air. Inside, the pews had been pushed to the walls, creating space for tables laden with food and an open area that would serve as a dance floor if Reverend Hughes was indeed feeling generous. Their entrance caused a momentary lull in the conversation before Mayor Thornton boomed out. "Here she is, folks. Our new school teacher, Miss Harrington. Come and make her welcome." What followed was a whirlwind of introductions, as Josephine met what seemed like the entire population of Scottsbluff in the span of 20 minutes. Names and faces blurred together. Mrs. Wilkins with her 4 school-aged children, Mr. Hollies from the general store and his wife who ran the millinery, Dr. Porter, a surprisingly young physician with kind eyes, and dozens more. Throughout it all, Josephine found herself glancing toward the door, watching for a particular tall figure with blue eyes. As the evening wore on and he didn't appear, disappointment began to settle in her chest. Perhaps ranch business had kept him after all. She was listening to Mrs. Peterson expound on the virtues of her apple cobbler recipe when a stir near the entrance caught her attention. Zachary stood in the doorway, hat in hand, scanning the crowd. When his eyes found hers, his serious expression softened into a smile that made her heart skip. He made his way through the crowd toward her, nodding greetings to townsfolk as he passed. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he wore a clean white shirt under a black vest, with his usual denim trousers replaced by darker wool ones. "Miss Harrington," he said when he reached her, his voice carrying a formality that hadn't been there the previous evening. "You look beautiful." "Thank you, Mr. Blackburn," she replied, equally formal though her cheeks warmed at the compliment. "I'm glad you could make it after all." "I said I would be here," he reminded her simply, as if keeping his word was the most natural thing in the world. Before they could continue their conversation, Reverend Hughes called for everyone's attention. After saying a brief grace over the food, he announced, "Let the socializing begin." "And yes," he added with a twinkle in his eye, "there may be dancing after we've eaten." The crowd surged toward the food tables. Zachary touched Josephine's elbow lightly. "May I fill a plate for you? That would be very kind, thank you." While he was gone, Emma appeared at Josephine's side, her eyes dancing with mischief. "I see my brother cleaned up nicely for the occasion," she said in a low voice. "He usually avoids these gatherings like they're typhoid fever. Does he?" Josephine tried to sound merely interested rather than pleased. "Oh yes, Daniel practically had to drag him to the Easter social." Emma's smile widened. "Yet here he is, voluntarily, the very evening after you arrive in town. Interesting coincidence, wouldn't you say?" Josephine was saved from responding by Zachary's return with 2 heaping plates. Emma excused herself with a knowing look that made Josephine blush anew. They found seats at one of the long tables, joined by Daniel the blacksmith and Emma with her 2 boys. The conversation flowed easily, with Samuel and Timothy peppering Josephine with questions about what they would learn in school and whether she knew any good stories. "Miss Harrington isn't here to entertain you," Zachary admonished gently when Timothy asked if she knew how to shoot a gun. "Actually, I do," Josephine surprised them by saying. "My father taught me before he went to war. He said every woman should know how to protect herself." Timothy's eyes widened with newfound respect. "Could you teach us?" "That's not part of the standard curriculum," Josephine laughed. "But perhaps one day I could demonstrate, with your parents' permission, of course." After the meal, several men with instruments, a fiddle, a guitar, and a harmonica assembled at one end of the room. The first strains of a lively tune filled the air, and couples began to move to the cleared space in the center. Zachary turned to Josephine, an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his expression. "Would you care to dance, Miss Harrington?" "I'd be delighted," she replied, placing her hand in his outstretched one. His hand was warm and calloused against her smaller one as he led her to the dance floor. When he placed his other hand at her waist and drew her into the dance, Josephine felt a flutter of nerves that had nothing to do with being new in town and everything to do with the man before her. They moved together remarkably well for 2 people who had never danced together before. Zachary was surprisingly graceful for a man who spent his days on horseback, and Josephine, who had learned dancing at her mother's insistence, found herself following his lead effortlessly. "You dance very well, Mr. Blackburn," she said as they circled the floor. "My mother's doing," he replied with a small smile. "She insisted her children would have proper manners despite living on the frontier. Emma and I had dancing lessons every Sunday after church until we were teenagers. She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. His eyes grew distant for a moment. "She would have liked you." The simple statement touched Josephine deeply. "I'm sorry I never had the chance to meet her." The music changed to a slower waltz, and Zachary drew her slightly closer, still maintaining a proper distance. "Tell me something about yourself that no one else in Scottsbluff knows yet," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Josephine considered for a moment. "I almost became engaged once in St. Louis," she admitted. "To a lawyer who worked with my father. Everyone expected it." His eyebrows rose slightly. "What happened? The war," she said simply. "He enlisted like so many others. He didn't come back." Understanding filled Zachary's eyes. "I'm sorry." It was a long time ago, Josephine said. And in truth, while I mourned him, I realized afterward that I had been going along with what was expected rather than what I truly wanted. And what do you truly want, Josephine Harrington? He asked, the first time he had used her full name. She met his gaze steadily. To build something that's mine, to make a difference in my students' lives, to never again let fear of the unknown keep me from adventure. A slow smile spread across his face. Noble ambitions. And you, she countered. What does Zachary Blackburn want from life? He was quiet for a moment, considering. Land of my own someday. A home that's more than just a bunkhouse at someone else's ranch. His eyes held hers. Someone to share it with. The music ended before Josephine could respond, breaking the spell that had settled around them. Reverend Hughes announced a short break for the musicians, and couples began to disperse from the dance floor. Would you like some punch? Zachary asked as they made their way back to the tables. Yes, please. While he was gone, Mrs. Peterson settled into the chair beside Josephine. I see you've made quite an impression on our Zach, she said without preamble. He's been very kind, Josephine replied carefully. Kind, yes, but there's more to it than that. Mrs. Peterson patted Josephine's hand. I've known that boy since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Never seen him look at anyone the way he's looking at you tonight. Josephine felt a blush rising again. We've only just met, Mrs. Peterson. Sometimes that's all it takes, the older woman said with a knowing nod. My George proposed after knowing me just 3 days. We had 52 years together before he passed, and I never regretted a single one of them. Before Josephine could formulate a response to this startling statement, Zachary returned with 2 cups of punch. Mrs. Peterson rose with a wink at Josephine. Don't overthink it, dear, she whispered before moving away. What was that about? Zachary asked, handing Josephine a cup. Mrs. Peterson was just sharing some wisdom, Josephine said, avoiding his eyes. The remainder of the evening passed in a pleasant blur. Josephine danced with Mayor Thornton, Dr. Porter, and several other men, but it was the dances with Zachary that left her breathless. Each time he claimed her hand, something seemed to build between them, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. As the social drew to a close, Zachary offered to walk her home. The night was clear, stars scattered across the vast Nebraska sky like diamonds on black velvet. They walked in companionable silence, Josephine's hand resting lightly on Zachary's arm. Thank you for coming tonight, she said as they reached her door. It meant a great deal to have a friend there. Is that what we are, friends? Zachary's voice was soft in the darkness. Josephine looked up at him, the moonlight silvering his features. I hope so, at the very least. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool night air. And if I hope for more than that, her heart hammered in her chest. Then I would say you're moving very quickly, Mr. Blackburn. Zach, he reminded her. And yes, perhaps I am. His hand rose to touch her cheek gently. But something tells me I shouldn't waste time when it comes to you, Josephine Harrington. Before she could respond, he stepped back, breaking the tension of the moment. I'll call on you tomorrow if I may. Perhaps show you more of the area before your school duties begin on Monday. I'd like that, she managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. He tipped his hat, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Until tomorrow, then. Sleep well. Josephine watched him walk away, her heart still racing, her cheek still warm where his fingers had touched it. Whatever was happening between them was moving with dizzying speed, yet somehow it didn't frighten her. Instead, she felt as though she was standing on the edge of something wonderful, something that might just be worth the risk. She entered her cottage, closed the door, and leaned against it, a smile spreading across her face. Well, Josephine, she whispered to herself, it seems Scottsbluff has more to offer than just a teaching position after all. Sunday dawned bright and clear, the late summer sun already warming the air as Josephine dressed for church services. She chose a simple blue dress with a white collar, appropriate for worship yet pretty enough to catch a certain cowboy's eye. Emma arrived to walk with her to church, her boys scrubbed clean and squirming in their Sunday best. "Zach said to tell you he'll meet us there," Emma reported with a knowing smile. "He had to check on a sick calf first thing." The small church was nearly full when they arrived. Josephine recognized many faces from the social the previous evening, and she was greeted warmly as Emma led her to a pew near the front. Just as Reverend Hughes was about to begin the service, Zachary slipped in beside them, nodding greetings to those nearby. "Good morning," he whispered to Josephine, his smile making her heart flutter ridiculously. Throughout the service, Josephine was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the clean scent of soap and sunshine that clung to him, the way his shoulder occasionally brushed hers as they stood for hymns, the deep timbre of his voice as he sang. It was both distracting and comforting, this strange new awareness of him. After the service, there was the usual socializing on the church steps. Josephine found herself surrounded by mothers eager to discuss their children's education and farmers inquiring whether she intended to maintain the school garden that Mr. Finch had started. "You seem to have the entire town wrapped around your finger already," Zachary commented when he finally managed to make his way to her side. "Poor old Finch never had this kind of reception, and he was here for 15 years. "I doubt it has anything to do with me personally," Josephine laughed. "They're simply relieved to have a teacher at all before harvest time. I wouldn't be so sure about that." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Are you still free for that ride I promised? I've saddled a gentle mare for you." "Yes, I'd like that very much." They made their excuses to Emma, who promised to have supper waiting for them at her house later. Zachary led Josephine to where 2 horses waited at the hitching post, his chestnut stallion and a dapple gray mare with kind eyes. "This is Daisy," he said, helping Josephine mount. "She's the gentlest horse on the ranch, perfect for a lady who hasn't ridden much." "What makes you think I haven't ridden much?" Josephine asked as she settled into the saddle, arranging her skirts. Zachary's eyes twinkled as he mounted his own horse. "The way you sit, too straight. Like you're expecting the horse to bolt any minute." Josephine relaxed her posture slightly, chagrined. "You're right. I've ridden occasionally, but never enough to be truly comfortable." "Don't worry," he assured her. "Daisy will take good care of you, and so will I." They rode out of town at a leisurely pace, heading northwest along the river. Zachary pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area, how his grandfather had been among the first settlers in the region, how the town had grown around the Stagecoach stop, and how the coming railroad, still 20 miles south, promised to change everything. "Some folks are pushing to have the route altered to pass closer to Scottsbluff," he explained as they paused to let the horses drink from the river. "Others think we're better off without all the changes that would bring." "And you, what do you think?" Josephine asked, finding she genuinely wanted to know his opinion. Zachary considered for a moment. Progress is inevitable. Better to plan for it than be overtaken by it. He glanced at her. "What about you? Would you prefer Scottsbluff to stay exactly as it is?" "I've barely had time to know it as it is," she pointed out. "But I believe communities must grow and change to survive, just as people do." He nodded, seeming pleased with her answer. "Come on. There's something I want to show you." They rode for another half hour, climbing gradually away from the river. Josephine was just beginning to wonder how much farther they would go when Zachary reined in his horse at the crest of a hill. "Here we are," Josephine gasped as she took in the view. Below them, the river wound its way through the valley like a silver ribbon. To the west, distant bluffs rose against the horizon, their rugged profiles standing sentinel over the plains. And stretching in all directions was a sea of grass, dotted with wildflowers and the occasional copse of trees. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "This is my land," Zachary said quietly. "Or it will be once the final payment is made next spring. 160 acres." Josephine looked at him in surprise. "You're homesteading," he nodded. "Have been for 3 years now. Working at the Lazy R pays for it. I've built a small cabin over there." He pointed to a distant structure she hadn't noticed at first. "And I'm clearing fields for crops to supplement the ranching." "Your own place," Josephine murmured, remembering his words from the dance. "Land of my own someday. A home that's more than just a bunkhouse at someone else's ranch." "It's not much yet," he admitted. "But it will be. I have plans." The way he looked at her as he said it made Josephine wonder if she might somehow figure into those plans. The thought should have alarmed her. They had known each other only 2 days, after all, but instead it filled her with a strange, buoyant hope. "Would you like to see the cabin?" he asked, sounding almost shy. "Yes, I would." They rode down the hill toward the simple log structure. It was small but solidly built, with a stone chimney and a covered porch across the front. A corral stood empty nearby, and the beginnings of a barn rose a short distance away. Zachary helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "It's not much to look at inside," he warned as he tied the horses to the porch rail. The cabin's interior was indeed simple: one main room with a stone fireplace, a table and 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, and shelves holding books, tools, and cooking implements. Everything was neat and clean, if sparse. "You built this yourself?" Josephine asked, running her hand over the smooth wood of the table. "Most of it. Daniel helped with the chimney. He's better with stone than I am." Zachary watched her explore, his expression a mixture of pride and uncertainty. "What do you think?" "I think it's wonderful," she said honestly. "A perfect beginning." Something in his face relaxed at her words. "That's exactly what it is, a beginning." They stood looking at each other across the small room, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Josephine found herself wondering what it would be like to share this space with him, to make a home here on this beautiful stretch of Nebraska prairie. The thought startled her with its clarity and longing. She barely knew this man, yet something about him, about this place, called to her soul in a way nothing ever had before. Zachary seemed to sense her thoughts, or perhaps he shared them. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Josephine, I know this is fast. Too fast, probably. But I've never felt this way about anyone." "Nor have I," she admitted softly. "It's terrifying." "Yes." His hand rose to touch her cheek, much as he had the night before, and wonderful. This time, when he leaned in, she met him halfway. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question more than a demand. When she answered by stepping closer, his arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him as the kiss deepened. Josephine had been kissed before, chaste, proper kisses from the lawyer in St. Louis. A few stolen moments in garden corners at parties, but nothing like this. This was a promise, a beginning, a glimpse of a future she hadn't known she wanted until this moment. When they finally parted, both breathless, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "I should apologize," he murmured. "Please don't," she whispered back. He chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest against hers. "I was going to say I should apologize for not doing that sooner." Josephine laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "In that case, you're forgiven." They stayed at the cabin for another hour, sitting on the porch as Zachary pointed out the boundaries of his land and described his plans for the future, the crops he would plant, the cattle he would raise, the orchard he hoped to start. Josephine listened, offering suggestions occasionally, finding herself drawn into his vision of what this place could become. As the afternoon waned, they reluctantly mounted their horses for the ride back to town. Emma would be expecting them for supper, and Josephine had last-minute preparations to make for her first day of school the following morning. They rode in companionable silence for a while, each lost in thought. Finally, Josephine said, Thank you for showing me your land. It means a great deal that you shared it with me. Zachary glanced at her, his expression serious. I've never brought anyone there before, not even Emma. The significance of this statement wasn't lost on Josephine. Why me then? He considered for a moment before answering. Because when I saw you standing there by the Stagecoach station, something told me my life was about to change. And when I look at that land, I see possibilities. When I look at you, I see the same thing. Josephine's heart swelled at his words. I feel it too, she admitted. This connection between us, it's unlike anything I've experienced before. So where do we go from here? He asked, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty despite his earlier confidence. Forward, I suppose, Josephine said with a small smile. One day at a time. I have a school to run and you have a ranch to build. And in between, his eyes held hers. In between, we get to know each other properly, she said firmly. Court, as my mother would have insisted. Zachary's face broke into a grin. Court, is it? That sounds very proper, Miss Harrington. I am a school teacher now, Mr. Blackburn, she reminded him primly, though her eyes danced with humor. I must maintain certain standards. Of course. He nudged his horse closer to hers. And would these standards permit me to call on you regularly? Perhaps escort you to dinner at the hotel on occasion. Accompany you on Sunday walks after church. I believe they would, Josephine replied, unable to suppress her smile. Though the town gossips will have a field day. Let them, Zachary said with a shrug. People will talk regardless. Might as well give them something worth talking about. As they approached the outskirts of Scottsbluff, the reality of their situation began to settle around Josephine. Tomorrow, she would stand before 28 students as their teacher. She would be responsible not just for their education, but for setting an example in the community. Her personal life would be scrutinized, her actions judged. Yet, as she glanced at the man riding beside her, she found she didn't care. Whatever was beginning between them felt right, felt true, in a way nothing else ever had. It might be fast, it might raise eyebrows, but Josephine knew in her heart that meeting Zachary Blackburn had been more than chance. It had been the beginning of something remarkable. Supper at Emma's house was a lively affair, with Samuel and Timothy eager to impress their new teacher, and Daniel regaling them with stories of his time as a Union cavalryman. Throughout the meal, Josephine caught Zachary watching her with a warmth that made her cheeks flush and her heart race. You'll do wonderfully tomorrow, Emma assured her as they cleared the dishes. The children have been desperate for a teacher. They'll be on their best behavior at least for the first week. I hope so, Josephine laughed, though I'm prepared for some testing of boundaries. Later, as Zachary walked her home in the gathering dusk, they made plans for him to escort her to dinner the following Friday evening. A reward for surviving your first week of teaching, he suggested. At her door, he kissed her again, briefly but with a promise of more to come. Good night, Josephine. Dream of the future. I will, she promised, knowing she would indeed dream of blue eyes and a cabin on a hill overlooking the river. The next morning, Josephine rose before dawn, too nervous and excited to sleep. She dressed with care in a modest navy dress with white cuffs, pinned her hair in a simple but tidy style, and gathered her teaching materials. As she left her cottage, she found a small bouquet of wildflowers on her doorstep with a note. For luck, Z. The gesture brought tears to her eyes. Impulsively, she tucked one of the flowers into her hair before carrying the rest inside to place in a jar of water. With renewed confidence, she made her way to the schoolhouse, where several children already waited on the steps despite the early hour. Good morning, she greeted them with a smile. I'm Miss Harrington, your new teacher. We know, said a girl of about 12, her eyes bright with curiosity. Uncle Zach told us all about you. Uncle Zach, Josephine repeated, momentarily confused. She's Lily Richardson, Samuel explained, appearing at her side. Mr. Richardson's niece. She lives at the Lazy R, of course. Zachary was foreman at the ranch owned by the absent Mr. Richardson. His niece would naturally be under Zachary's care while at the ranch. "Well, Lily, I'm pleased to meet you," Josephine said warmly. "And all of you as well. Shall we go inside and begin our day?" The first day of school passed in a blur of activity assessing the children's abilities, establishing routines, and beginning to learn their individual personalities. By the time the final bell rang at 3 o'clock, Josephine was exhausted but exhilarated. Teaching was what she had been born to do, and these bright, eager children, even those who tried to test her patience, were a joy to work with. As the last student departed, Josephine sank into her chair with a sigh of relief. The sound of boots on the wooden steps made her look up, expecting to see a parent with a question or concern. Instead, Zachary stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "How was your first day, Miss Harrington?" he asked, his formal tone belied by the warmth in his eyes. "Challenging, exhausting, and absolutely wonderful," she replied honestly. "And yours, Mr. Blackburn?" "Better now," he said, coming to perch on the edge of a student desk near her. "I've been thinking about you all day." "Have you?" She tried to sound nonchalant, though her heart had begun its now familiar quickening at his presence. "Yes, wondering how you were faring with the likes of Tommy Jenkins and Lily Richardson in the same room. Those two could start an argument in an empty house." Josephine laughed. "They did have a rather spirited debate about the capital of Montana Territory. And how did you handle it?" "I had them each find it in the atlas, then write a paragraph about what they learned, together." She smiled at the memory of their disgruntled expressions. Zachary whistled appreciatively. "Clever. No wonder Mr. Richardson was so keen to hire you when the school board recommended it." "Mr. Richardson has never met me," Josephine pointed out. "No, but he trusts my judgment. I may have mentioned in my last letter that I thought you would be perfect for Scottsbluff." Josephine stared at him. "Your last letter, but we hadn't met when I was hired." Zachary looked momentarily confused, then understanding dawned. "No, not you specifically. The board had decided to hire a female teacher this time, after Mr. Finch. I wrote to Mr. Richardson that I thought it was a good idea, that the children might benefit from a woman's influence." He smiled wryly. "Little did I know just how much influence you would have, and not just on the children." "I see," Josephine said, both relieved and oddly touched. "Well, I'm grateful for your support then and now." Zachary reached for her hand, his calloused fingers enveloping hers. "You have it always, Josephine, whatever you need." The simple promise, spoken so earnestly, touched something deep within her. This man, whom she had known less than a week, had already become essential to her happiness in a way that both thrilled and frightened her. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." For the remainder of the week, they fell into a pattern. Zachary would stop by the schoolhouse after classes ended, sometimes just for a few minutes, sometimes staying longer to help her prepare for the next day. On Wednesday, he brought her a roast beef sandwich from the hotel restaurant when he learned she often worked through lunch. On Thursday, he fixed the broken hinge on the bookcase while she graded arithmetic papers. Each day, Josephine found herself falling deeper under the spell of this quiet, capable man, who showed his affection not just with words but with countless thoughtful actions. By Friday, when he arrived to escort her to dinner as promised, she knew with certainty that what she felt was far more than infatuation or gratitude. "You look beautiful," he said when she opened her door, dressed in her best gown, a rich burgundy silk that had been her mother's last gift to her. "Thank you," she replied, admiring the sight of him in a proper suit rather than his usual work clothes. "You clean up rather nicely yourself, Mr. Blackburn." The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Scottsbluff, which wasn't saying much compared to the restaurants Josephine had known in St. Louis. But the tablecloths were clean, the silverware polished, and the roast beef tender. What made the evening special was not the setting but the company. Zachary spoke of his plans for the homestead, the crops he would plant in the spring, the improvements he wanted to make to the cabin, the livestock he hoped to acquire. Josephine shared stories of her first week of teaching, the progress her students had already made, and her ideas for expanding the school curriculum to include more practical skills. "You love it, don't you?" Zachary asked, watching her face light up as she described a particularly clever solution one of the younger children had devised for a problem. "I do," she admitted. "It's challenging and exhausting, but so rewarding." "I'm glad," he said simply. "You deserve work that brings you joy." After dinner, they walked through the quiet streets of Scottsbluff, Josephine's hand tucked into the crook of Zachary's arm. The night was cool, stars brilliant in the clear sky above. They talked of inconsequential things, books they had read, places they had seen, memories of childhood adventures. At her door, Zachary hesitated, as if gathering his courage for something. "Josephine, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart skipped at his serious tone. "What is it?" "I've been offered a position as ranch manager for the Lazy Artique's new operation in Wyoming Territory. Mr. Richardson is expanding, and he wants me to oversee the new property." Josephine felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. "Wyoming? But that's 3 days' ride from here, at least," he finished for her. "It would mean leaving Scottsbluff, leaving my homestead." "Leaving you?" The last words were spoken so softly she almost didn't hear them, but she did, and they sent both pain and hope coursing through her. "When would you go?" she managed to ask, her voice steadier than she felt. "That's just it. I've decided not to take it." Zachary's eyes held hers intently. "My life is here now. My future is here." Relief washed over Josephine, followed immediately by concern. "But isn't this a great opportunity for you? I wouldn't want to be the reason you passed it up." Zachary took both her hands in his. "You're not the reason, Josephine, or at least not the only reason. Yes, meeting you has changed everything for me, but even before you arrived, I was building something here, my land, my place in this community. I don't want to start over somewhere else." "Are you certain?" she pressed, needing to be sure he wouldn't regret this decision. "More certain than I've ever been about anything," he assured her, "except perhaps one other thing." "And what is that?" she asked, her pulse quickening at the intensity of his gaze. "That I'm falling in love with you, Josephine Harrington. I know it's fast. I know it defies all convention, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Josephine's heart soared at his words. "I'm falling in love with you too, Zachary. It terrifies me how quickly, how completely, but I can't deny it." He drew her close then, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke of promise rather than passion. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I don't want to rush you. We can take as much time as you need." "I appreciate that," she said softly. "This is all so new, so unexpected, but it feels right, doesn't it?" "Like coming home," he agreed, "even though we've just begun." The weeks that followed were the happiest of Josephine's life. She threw herself into her teaching with enthusiasm, earning the respect of the townspeople and the adoration of her pupils. Zachary divided his time between his duties at the Lazy R and work on his homestead, but he made time every day to see Josephine, even if only briefly. They settled into a comfortable routine: supper at Emma's house on Wednesdays, dinner at the hotel on Fridays, long rides on Saturdays when weather permitted, and church followed by walks on Sundays. In between, Zachary would stop by the schoolhouse or Josephine's cottage, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book he thought she'd enjoy, flowers he'd picked along the trail, once a kitten he'd rescued from a barn at the ranch, which Josephine promptly named Scholar and installed as the schoolhouse mouser. As September gave way to October and the prairie began to don its autumn colors, their love deepened. They spoke of the future often, making plans that increasingly included each other. Zachary added a second room to his cabin and began construction of a proper barn. Josephine started a school library with books donated by townspeople and ordered from back east. It was on a golden October afternoon, with the leaves of the cottonwoods along the river turned to flame against the blue sky, that Zachary brought Josephine once more to his homestead. They had come on horseback, Josephine now comfortable enough on Daisy to enjoy the ride rather than merely endure it. "I have something to show you," Zachary said as they approached the cabin, which now sported a fresh coat of whitewash and proper glass windows instead of oiled paper. "More improvements?" Josephine asked, admiring how much progress he had made in just a few short weeks. "Of a sort." He helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist as they always did now, a familiar gesture that still sent warmth spreading through her. He led her not to the cabin but past it, to a spot on the hillside that offered the best view of the river valley below. There, a new bench had been installed, made of polished wood with decorative carvings along the back and arms. "Zachary, it's beautiful," Josephine exclaimed, running her fingers over the intricate pattern of leaves and vines carved into the wood. "Daniel helped with the metalwork," he said, gesturing to the graceful iron brackets that supported the seat. "But I did the carving myself." "Wanted it to be special." "It is," she assured him, wondering at the hint of nervousness in his manner. "But why here specifically?" "Because this is my favorite spot on the whole property," he explained, "where I can see everything: the river, the hills, the sunrise, the sunset. Where I feel most at peace." He took her hands in his. "And because I wanted a place where we could sit together and watch our children play someday." Josephine's breath caught at his words. "Our children," Zachary nodded, his blue eyes serious. "If you'll have me, Josephine, if you'll be my wife." For a moment, she could only stare at him, overwhelmed by joy and the sudden certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be with exactly the right person. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Zachary, I will marry you." His face broke into a radiant smile as he swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his exuberance. When he set her down, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "It was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a small but perfect sapphire. "My father gave it to her when they homesteaded here. She always said it reminded her of the Nebraska sky." "It's perfect," Josephine breathed as he slipped it onto her finger. The ring fit as if it had been made for her. They sat on the bench then, Josephine nestled against Zachary's side, his arm around her shoulders, and talked of their future together. They would marry in the spring, after the school term ended. Josephine would continue teaching. The school board had already asked her to sign a contract for the following year, and they would live at the homestead, which would officially become Zachary's property, once the final payment was made in April. "We'll have to expand the cabin again," Zachary mused, his fingers playing with a strand of Josephine's hair that had escaped its pins. "Add a proper kitchen, perhaps a sitting room, and eventually more bedrooms," Josephine added, blushing slightly at the implication. "For those children you mentioned." Zachary's arm tightened around her. "How many were you thinking?" "At least 2, she replied with a smile. "But I'm open to negotiation." He laughed, the sound echoing across the hillside. "I've always wanted a large family. Growing up with just Emma, I sometimes felt lonely." "Then a large family it shall be," Josephine agreed, loving the idea of filling their home with children's laughter. "Though perhaps we should start with one and see how we manage." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, they reluctantly prepared to return to town. Zachary had promised Emma they would share their news at supper, and Josephine knew there would be much excitement and planning to begin. "Are you happy, truly?" Zachary asked as he helped her mount Daisy for the ride back. "This life will be very different from what you knew in St. Louis." Josephine looked down at him, this man who had captured her heart so unexpectedly. "I've never been happier," she said truthfully. "St. Louis was my past. You, this land, Scottsbluff, you're my future. The future I didn't even know I wanted until I found it." The news of their engagement spread through Scottsbluff like wildfire. By Monday morning, there wasn't a person in town who hadn't heard that the new schoolteacher and the foreman from the Lazy R were to be married in the spring. Josephine's students peppered her with questions. The mothers who came to collect their children offered congratulations and advice, and even Reverend Hughes stopped by the schoolhouse to express his blessing. Mayor Thornton made a point of visiting Josephine after school on Tuesday, ostensibly to discuss the upcoming Harvest Festival, but really, she suspected, to assure himself that she intended to fulfill her teaching contract despite her marriage plans. "Of course I'll continue teaching," she assured him. "Zach and I have discussed it thoroughly. I love my work here." "Excellent, excellent," the mayor said, visibly relieved. "And where will you be living after the wedding? The teacherage is intended for single teachers, you understand." "We'll be living at Zachary's homestead," Josephine explained. "It's not so far that I can't ride in each day, and he's already planning to build me a proper stable for Daisy." This arrangement seemed to satisfy the mayor, who took his leave after extracting a promise from Josephine to oversee the children's recitations at the Harvest Festival. Life settled into a new pattern. Weekdays were filled with teaching and school-related activities, while weekends were devoted to preparations for their future together. Josephine began setting aside items for her Hope chest linens, kitchenware, the special things that would make their house a home. Zachary continued work on the cabin and outbuildings, with help from Daniel and other friends when particularly heavy labor was required. As October gave way to November, the weather turned colder. The first snow fell just after Thanksgiving, transforming the prairie into a glittering wonderland. School continued through the winter months, with attendance increasing as farm children were freed from field work, until spring. Christmas brought a round of celebrations, a school pageant, a church service with carols, a community dinner at the town hall. Zachary presented Josephine with a beautiful writing desk he had crafted himself, while she gave him a fine leather-bound journal and a silver pocket watch she had ordered from back east. "For keeping track of the hours until we're together," she told him as he admired the watch's intricate engravings. The new year of 1877 arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow that kept Zachary at the ranch for nearly a week, unable to make the journey to town. When he finally appeared at Josephine's door, half frozen but grinning broadly, she nearly wept with relief. "Don't ever scare me like that again," she scolded as she helped him out of his ice-encrusted coat and pushed him into a chair by the fire. "I was imagining you frozen in a snowdrift somewhere. Takes more than a Nebraska blizzard to keep me from you," he assured her, pulling her onto his lap for a kiss that quickly banished any lingering chill. As winter slowly released its grip on the prairie, their wedding plans took more concrete shape. They would marry on the first Saturday in June, after the school term ended but before the summer heat became too oppressive. The ceremony would be held at the church, followed by a celebration at the town hall that, given the enthusiasm of the townspeople, promised to be the social event of the year. Emma took charge of the preparations with her usual efficiency, enlisting help from the women of the church to sew Josephine's wedding dress and prepare the food for the reception. Mayor Thornton promised to provide the best whiskey from his private stock for toasts, while Reverend Hughes waived the usual church fee as his gift to the couple. In April, as promised, Zachary made the final payment on his homestead. The land was officially his, a fact he celebrated by taking Josephine to the property and walking the boundaries with her, pointing out his plans for each section where the main house would eventually stand, where the orchards would be planted, where the best grazing land lay for the cattle he planned to raise. "It's not much compared to what you left behind in St. Louis," he said as they stood on the hill near their bench, surveying the property. "But it's ours." Josephine squeezed his hand. "It's everything, Zachary. Everything I could ever want." As the wedding day approached, Josephine found herself reflecting on the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this place, this man. If the stagecoach hadn't left without her that August day, if Zachary hadn't happened along at just the right moment. The possibilities of what might have been made her shiver. The evening before the wedding, as tradition dictated they spend apart, Emma hosted a small gathering for Josephine at her house, a quiet celebration with the women who had become her friends over the past months. Mrs. Peterson, who had taken on a grandmotherly role in Josephine's life. Lily Richardson, who at 13 considered herself quite grown up and insisted on helping with the wedding preparations. Several mothers of Josephine's students, and of course, Emma herself, soon to be her sister by marriage. "Are you nervous, dear?" Mrs. Peterson asked as they sat in Emma's parlor, sipping tea and enjoying the cake that had been baked as a practice run for the wedding reception. "A little," Josephine admitted. "Not about marrying Zach, I've never been more certain of anything. But about everything changing again." "Change is the nature of life," Mrs. Peterson said wisely. "But love, real love, that's the constant that sees you through the changes. And my brother loves you something fierce," Emma added, her eyes bright with affection. "I've never seen him so happy, so settled in himself." "He's a good man," Lily piped up. "Uncle Richardson says he's the best horseman and the most honest man he's ever employed. That's why he keeps trying to send him to Wyoming." This was news to Josephine. "He's still offering Zach the Wyoming position," Lily nodded, then looked chagrined. "Oh, was that a secret? I heard them talking last month when Uncle came to visit the ranch." "It's all right," Josephine assured her, though her mind was racing. "Zach and I have no secrets." But apparently they did, or at least one. Why hadn't Zachary mentioned that Mr. Richardson was still trying to persuade him to take the Wyoming job? Was he reconsidering? Was he sacrificing a better opportunity for her sake? These questions plagued her throughout the evening and followed her to bed that night. She tossed and turned, unable to find rest, until finally she rose, wrapped a shawl around her nightdress, and sat by the window, staring out at the starlit prairie. The sound of hoofbeats in the stillness of the night startled her. Looking out, she saw a familiar figure on horseback approaching her cottage. Zachary, breaking tradition to see her on the eve of their wedding. She met him at the door before he could knock, concern etched on her features. "Zach, what's wrong? Is someone ill?" "No, nothing like that," he assured her, stepping inside. He looked as restless as she felt, his hair much as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. "I couldn't sleep. Needed to see you." Relief gave way to the questions that had been tormenting her. "Why didn't you tell me Mr. Richardson is still trying to send you to Wyoming?" Zachary looked startled, then sighed. "Lily, yes, but that's not the point. Why keep it from me?" He moved to the window, gazing out at the night for a long moment before turning back to her. "Because it doesn't matter. I've already refused." "But why?" Josephine pressed. "Is it truly what you want, or are you staying for my sake?" Zachary crossed the room in 2 strides, taking her hands in his. "Listen to me, Josephine. Yes, I'm staying for you, but not in the way you think. I'm staying because my life, my future, is here with you. Not just because I love you, though God knows I do, but because what we're building together is more important to me than any job, any amount of money." "Are you sure?" she whispered, searching his face for any sign of doubt. "I don't want you to resent me someday for holding you back." "Resent you?" He shook his head, a smile finally breaking through his serious expression. "Josephine, you haven't held me back. You've pushed me forward. Before you came, I was content to work for someone else, to build my homestead slowly, maybe someday find a wife who wouldn't mind the isolation. Now, He gestured around them. Now I have a partner, someone who sees the same future I do, someone who makes me want to build something lasting, something that's ours. The sincerity in his voice, in his eyes, banished the last of her doubts. I love you, Zachary Blackburn. And I love you, Josephine Harrington, soon to be Josephine Blackburn. He kissed her then, a kiss that promised tomorrow and all the days after. When they parted, both a little breathless, he smiled ruefully. I should go before someone spots my horse and decides I'm compromising your virtue the night before our wedding. Josephine laughed, feeling lighter than she had all evening. Yes, you should. I'll see you at the church tomorrow. I'll be the nervous one at the altar, he promised, kissing her once more before slipping out into the night. The next morning dawned clear and perfect, as if nature itself approved of their union. Emma arrived early to help Josephine dress, bringing with her the completed wedding gown, a creation of ivory silk with delicate lace trim that made Josephine gasp when she saw it. It's beautiful, Emma. I can't believe you and the ladies made this for me. Your family now, Emma said simply, helping Josephine into the gown. Or you will be in a few hours. The church was filled to capacity when Josephine arrived. Mayor Thornton, who had offered to give her away in the absence of her father, waited at the door, resplendent in his best suit. You look radiant, my dear, he told her, offering his arm. Ready to begin your new life? More than ready, Josephine replied, her eyes already seeking the tall figure waiting at the altar. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. Zachary, handsome in a new black suit, his blue eyes never leaving hers as they spoke their vows. The warm weight of the gold band as he slipped it onto her finger to join her engagement ring. The minister's words pronouncing them husband and wife. And then Zachary's kiss, gentle but filled with promise, sealing their commitment before God and their community. The celebration afterward was everything a frontier wedding should be: abundant food, flowing drink, music and dancing that continued well into the evening. Everyone in town seemed determined to make the day special for the couple who had captured their collective heart. As the sun began to set, Zachary led Josephine outside for a moment of quiet amidst the festivities. They stood on the steps of the town hall, his arm around her waist, watching the golden light fade over the prairie. Happy Mrs. Blackburn, he asked, the new name bringing a smile to both their faces. Completely, she assured him, leaning into his embrace. And you, Mr. Blackburn? More than I ever thought possible. He brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. I still can't believe how lucky I am, finding you stranded by that stagecoach. I think perhaps I'm the lucky one, Josephine countered. After all, you're the one who said I'll take you home. And I meant it, Zachary said softly. Not just to Scottsbluff that day, but to our home, to our life together. Our life together, Josephine echoed, watching the first stars appear in the deepening blue of the sky. It sounds perfect. And as they rejoined their guests for another dance, Josephine knew it was true. The journey that had begun with a missed stagecoach had led her not just to Scottsbluff, but to love, to family, to a future brighter than any she could have imagined. In Zachary's arms, she had indeed found her home. Epilogue, 10 years later, 1887. The sound of children's laughter carried on the warm June breeze as Josephine stood on the porch of their farmhouse, watching Zachary demonstrate to their eldest son how to properly groom a horse. William, named for Zachary's father, was 8 now, and the spitting image of his father the same blue eyes, the same serious expression when concentrating on a task. Nearby, their 6-year-old daughter Catherine chased butterflies through the wildflowers that Josephine had insisted on preserving when they expanded the garden. Their youngest, 3-year-old James, sat on a blanket in the shade of a cottonwood, carefully building a tower of wooden blocks that his father had carved for him. The homestead had flourished over the past decade, just as their family had. The original cabin had been expanded into a proper farmhouse, with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a sitting room where Josephine still tutored children occasionally, though she had given up her formal teaching position after William's birth. The barn now housed 6 horses and a milk cow, while a fenced pasture beyond held a growing herd of cattle. Zachary had proven to have a knack for breeding horses as well as cattle, and their stock was now sought after throughout the region. The Blackburn Ranch, as it was known, had a reputation for quality that brought buyers from as far away as Denver. Fields of wheat and corn stretched to the east, while an orchard of apple and cherry trees was beginning to bear fruit to the west. A vegetable garden provided fresh produce for their table, and Emma often joked that her brother had created a little kingdom on his quarter section of Nebraska soil. Scottsbluff itself had grown as well. The railroad had finally come through in 1882, bringing with it new businesses and settlers. The one-room schoolhouse had given way to a proper school building with 3 classrooms and 3 teachers, one of whom had been Josephine's student in that first class she taught. Life had not been without its challenges. They had weathered drought, hailstorms, and a particularly severe winter that had claimed a quarter of their cattle. Josephine had lost a baby between Catherine and James, a sorrow that had tested their faith and their marriage. But they had emerged stronger, their love deeper for having faced adversity together. "Mama, look," William called, proudly showing off the gleaming coat of the pony Zachary had given him for his last birthday. "Pa says I did it perfect." "Perfectly," Josephine corrected automatically but with a smile. "And it looks wonderful, Will. You've done an excellent job." Zachary caught her eye over their son's head, his smile still capable of making her heart skip a beat after all these years. He said something to William, then made his way to the porch while their son continued his grooming lesson. "You look deep in thought," Zachary said, leaning against the porch rail beside her. At 40, he was still as handsome as the day they'd met, though lines around his eyes and strands of silver at his temples spoke of the passing years. "Just counting my blessings," Josephine replied, leaning into him as his arm circled her waist. At 32, she had grown into her role as ranch wife and mother, finding a contentment she had never imagined possible in her St. Louis days. "Any particular reason?" he asked, dropping a kiss on the top of her head. "It's June 6th, she reminded him. 10 years ago today, we said our vows in the church." "As if I could forget our anniversary," Zachary chuckled. "Why do you think I sent Emma and Daniel an invitation to supper? They're taking the children for the night so I can properly celebrate with my wife." "Zachary Blackburn, you schemer," Josephine laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "And here I thought you'd forgotten entirely." "Never," he said, his expression growing serious. "Not a day goes by that I don't thank God for bringing you into my life, Josephine, even when I'm being stubborn." She teased, knowing her strong will had occasionally been a source of tension between them. "Especially then," he assured her. "Your stubbornness built this place as much as my labor did. Your vision, your determination to make this not just a ranch but a home." Josephine looked out over their property, at their children playing in the golden afternoon light, at the house they had built room by room, at the land they had tamed together. "We did build something wonderful, didn't we?" "We're still building," Zachary reminded her. "Every day. And I wouldn't want anyone else beside me for the journey." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land they both loved, Josephine thought back to that dusty afternoon outside the Stagecoach station. How lost she had felt, how uncertain of her future. And then Zachary had appeared, offering to take her home, a promise he had kept in ways neither of them could have imagined. "I love you, Zachary Blackburn," she said softly, the words as true now as the first time she had spoken them. "And I love you, Josephine Blackburn," he replied, drawing her closer for a kiss that, even after 10 years, still held all the promise of that first one they had shared in his cabin on the hill. Later, with their children safely in Emma and Daniel's care for the night, they sat on the bench he had made for her so long ago, watching the stars emerge in the vast Nebraska sky. Zachary's arm around her shoulders, Josephine's head resting against him. They spoke of the years behind them and the years still to come of William's education, of Catherine's artistic talents, of little James's curious mind that was always full of questions. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't missed that stagecoach?" Josephine asked, her voice soft in the darkness. "Sometimes," Zachary admitted. "But then I think that somehow, some way, we would have found each other regardless. Some things are just meant to be." And as they walked hand in hand back to the house they had built together, Josephine knew he was right. Their love had been written in the stars, in the vast open sky of the Nebraska prairie, long before she had ever set foot in Scottsbluff. All it had taken was a missed stagecoach, a cowboy on horseback, and those simple words that had changed her life forever. "I'll take you home."